Good morning, everyone. I'm sure all of you have been following the news related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's still hard to believe that in this day and age, countries need to resort to war, which is the least effective method of negotiation to resolve issues. But let's continue to send our thoughts and prayers to all the families affected in that region. So last week, we continued with the topic of the last days, and we talked about four key scriptures from a principled perspective to help us understand the symbolic meaning behind them. In essence, instead of global destruction, which it kind of seems like it's conveying, the principle explains that those verses prophesied about the last days symbolizing the end of an evil era and the beginning of an era of goodness. So it's a hopeful message. This week, I wanted to continue on the topic of the last days and present how humanity is moving towards the fulfillment of the three great blessings. This is part of God's purpose of creation, and it's a hopeful sign that we are living in the last days right now. Okay, let's take a look at some of the verses in the principle. We can deduce that today is in fact the last days by examining the various circumstances of the present age. We can recognize in these circumstances the restoration of the three great blessings, which God has purposed in his providence of restoration. So basically, just a recap of the whole principle. God, from the very beginning, had a vision, had a purpose, and basically created this beautiful world, created humanity, and said, hey guys, make sure you do three things: be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. Okay, you do that, and we're all good. That was the vision. But as we know, the fall happened, things didn't go as planned, and the rest of history has been a history of God determining absolutely to get humanity back on track to realize that ultimate dream of a peaceful world, of one family under God living in peace. So let's look at the three different blessings and how it's been developed over time. So the first blessing, development. So the first blessing, to be more specific, to be fruitful, according to the principle, means to perfect one's character. And there's some signs that the first blessing, this development of one's character and spirituality, connection with God, that has been developing over history and restored over time. So let's take a look. First, we can observe that the spirituality of fallen people is being restored. Adam and Eve, though not quite perfect, were able to converse with God. This is before the fall. When they fell from this state, they caused their descendants also to sink into ignorance of and insensibility to God. So basically, before the fall, Adam and Eve were able to somewhat converse with God, but afterwards, basically, everything dropped. And so humanity's connection, communication with God has really fell into this realm of ignorance and insensibility, not being sensitive to connecting with God's heart. But there's hope. Gradually, the spirituality of fallen people has been rehabilitated as they enjoy the merit of the age and the providence of restoration. In the last days, therefore, many faithful believers will acquire the ability to communicate with God. Okay, pretty cool. So it's been developing over history. More and more people are able to kind of connect and sense God's heart and really elevate their sense of spirituality. We are entering an era when we can reach individual perfection and restore the first blessing of God. So the principle is basically saying that spirituality is being restored, and you can see that the interest and awareness of the spirit world has developed dramatically over the past several decades. So many books and shows appear on about spirit world, and much more than before. Topics, books, shows, TV shows, shows about meditation, mindfulness, intention, channeling spirits, life after death. One interesting example, I was talking with Reverend Compton. He is a Divine Principle lecturer, and he had posted a series of videos of different topics from the principle online. And he didn't make one any more special than the other, but he titled them, based on the topic. And the one on give and take, or on relationships, how do original relationships, so far since he's posted, it has about 1,600 views. Okay. Relationships is a topic that people are interested in. But in comparison, the video that he posted on Spirit World had 240,000 views. That's 150 times more. So apparently people are interested in this topic of Spirit World. And when I talked with the PR team, they did say that Spirit World and topics on the Spirit World is trending these days. So it's an interesting thought that people's curiosity, interest, and development of spirituality has been growing over time. Okay, let's continue to read. A second sign that the first blessing is being restored in the present era can be seen in the historic trend towards the recovery of the freedom of the original mind. In the present era, as people struggle for freedom at the cost of their lives, the zeal to gain true freedom has reached its height. This is an indication that we are now entering a new era in which we can attain individual perfection, long denied by Satan, and freely go before God. So what the principle is saying is that our original mind seeks freedom, particularly this freedom of faith or religion, a belief in God. And although humanity has striven for this kind of freedom throughout history, more than ever before, there is this strong desire and almost expectation to be free, to be able to pursue that. I think, one example of this is the strong Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion. Maybe they, Putin might have expected that, people would just kind of accept that the people with power and who are more stronger, as long as you show that you have a lot more troops or weapons or the army, that those are weaker will just accept it and basically, surrender. But this spirit of this desire towards freedom has really strengthened this sense of, how do I say this? It's like they cannot accept being ruled over, something like that. And I feel like this desire for freedom is an original mind's desire, and it's growing stronger over the years. A third sign of the renewal of the first blessing is the restoration of true human value. In the present era, as democratic ideals have flourished, people have been promoting the emancipation of slaves, the freedom of oppressed racial minorities, and the independence of small and weak nations. They are advocating human rights and equality between the sexes and among all peoples. More than ever before, people are zealously uplifting the value of the individual towards its original value. This demonstrates that we have arrived at the threshold of the last days, when fallen people can restore the first blessing of God. So the third sign that the first blessing is being restored is this increase in the demand for human rights. The abolishment of slavery, even here in America, is a relatively recent occurrence. Of course, it's continuing to need to be addressed. And also racial inequality. Also, there's a strong development of the desire for equality between men and women, and this empowerment of minorities and independence of smaller and weaker nations. These are all signs that the demand for human rights has increased or has been elevated, And it's a sign that the first blessing, which is the strength of our original mind, has been being restored over time. Okay, so that's on the topic of the first blessing being restored over time. And now we're going to go to signs that the second blessing is being restored as well. So let's remember that God's second blessing to Adam and Eve was to multiply, which is not just about making babies, but it really means achieving true parenthood. In other words, being good parents, raising good children, creating a good family, society, and a world where goodness reigns. That's really what God meant when he said multiply. It's just to multiply goodness, to multiply the model of a good family, society, and world. So let's see how that has developed over time. In the present era, the world has been coalescing into one cultural sphere based on Christian ideals. As the world has been greatly influenced by the teachings of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, who are the true parents of humankind, the way has been opened for all people to become godly children. This trend is evidence that God's second blessing is being restored. Okay. So according to principle, the growth of this Christian cultural sphere and this trend towards being part of this global family are signs that the second blessing is being restored. Kind of reminds me of the song, We Are the World. We are the world. We are the children. Okay, I'll stop. But basically, this sense that we're one family beyond borders, nationalities, ethnicities, this kind of sense is actually more of a recent trend. Part of it is the technology and the connection, but this sense that, we need to go beyond our differences and come together. One substantial sign of that kind of closeness or connection, more greater connection, is the formation of the United Nations. Really recognizing every independent nation as part of the, coming to the table together. Also, another great sign is the formation of the Olympics, where almost all nations come together in healthy competition. I'd like to say also that another sign or evidence that this second blessing is being restored is the development of the blessing movement. As you know, Father and Mother Moon, they inherited this mission from Jesus and to really build God's kingdom and pioneer the marriage blessing movement, which encouraged people from different nations, even enemy nations and cultures, to commit to marry each other and create families that represent the unity of those nations and cultures. I feel that the blessing movement is one of the greatest contributions, Father and Mother Moon, really moving humanity towards this dream of establishing one family under God. Let's continue to read about other signs that the second blessing is being restored. God has worked his providence to restore the heavenly sovereignty by degrees. He sends prophets and saints to the fallen world to found religions and raise the level of morality. He establishes governments with higher standards of goodness, which come to oppose and destroy regimes with lower standards of goodness. To fulfill the providence of restoration, therefore, conflicts and wars are unavoidable. So when I first read this verse, I was kind of struck by this part of conflicts and wars being unavoidable. I definitely tend towards not wanting to engage in conflict, but basically the principle saying, as we elevate in our awareness of goodness and our original mind strengthens, we naturally kind of become averse towards things that are not true, that are not heavenly. And so another, according to principle, Another sign that the restoration of the second blessing is happening is this development of this heavenly sovereignty. So it's not just individuals seeking towards goodness, but even nations that are establishing standards of goodness. So one example I would say is, Jesus came to elevate humanity's relationship with God as a father figure, right? And guided us with the two great commandments. Do you remember what they are? It's a verse in Matthew, basically, love God with all your heart. That's the greatest commandment. And the second commandment, great commandment, is love thy neighbor as yourself. Right? You might think, oh, that's normal, that's obvious, but actually that wasn't obvious back in the day. People didn't love their neighbor. I mean, even now, it's not so easy to love your neighbor, but there's at least guidance towards this is what's expected of us, to love God and to love people. If we follow these two great commandments, the kingdom of heaven will be at hand. So I believe that, God sent these kind of people, historic figures, to really help us to elevate. And it didn't just end there. Okay. I believe that the development of America as a Christian democratic nation with global influence is a substantial sign of God's sovereignty. So I want to, one point here is that the US Constitution is actually the basis for almost all the constitutions of democratic nations around the world. And this Constitution is what institutionalized that the government should be based on the sovereignty of the people. This is revolutionary. And I believe that that's based on this Christian ideals. And so America is not just, how do I say, blessed by God, not for its own sake. It's actually for the sake of the world that America has been blessed. So we should always remember that America has this providential role for the sake of the world. One great example of this is after World War II, America, after defeating Germany and Japan, I think it's one of the first times in history where the winning nation actually helped the redevelopment of the losing nation. Usually it's pillaging and overtaxation and just taking all their resources, but America actually set the standard of actually helping the nation rebuild after winning a war. So this is really an example of godliness at the national sovereignty level. So this is another sign that the second blessing is being restored over time. Okay, let's read. I think there's one more example here. At present, our world is divided into two. The democratic world, which seeks to create societies on God's side, and the communist world, which has been establishing regimes on Satan's side. These two sovereignties with contrary purposes can by no means peacefully coexist. As human history nears its consummation, they will surely arrive at the point of intersection, colliding internally in the realm of ideology. This inner conflict may spur them to fight external wars with military forces. At the conclusion of this conflict, Satan's sovereignty will perish forever, and heaven's sovereignty will be reestablished as the one eternal sovereignty of God. Today, we are at this very point of intersection when these two worlds are confronting each other in the final battle. This is yet more evidence that the present era is the last days. So this is pretty amazing. The principle is prophesying that there will be this final battle between good and evil, or God-centered democracy versus communism or oppressive entities. And one very real and relevant example of this is, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the global response to support Ukraine. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's interesting. It all starts with this ideological conflict of one belief system versus another belief system coming in conflict with each other, and the principle says that it may show up in the form of an external conflict in war, and that's exactly what's happening right now. And one more example of that, in a recent World Summit where Mother Moon presided and hosted in Korea, she invited top leaders of the world, including the American Vice President and also former American Vice President, as well as the current Cambodian Prime Minister, Hun Sen. And the whole purpose of that summit was to talk about the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. So this is a very real issue right now. And according to principle, this is also an example of this final battle where literally in one nation, we have one side representing communism and the other side representing God-centered democracy. So really, there's a lot of effort being put into making this a successful reunification. It's very complicated, but the principle is very real and relevant, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a theology or a perspective, it is being practiced in real time. And so it's really important for us to understand what's happening from a principle perspective. And I'll just add one more thing on this topic. It may feel very anxious or tumultuous with Russia invading Ukraine, but in one sense, the response to that is a very hopeful sign that humanity, the world, is not going to just accept this as reality, but is actually supporting the resistance towards that effort. And in principle, it's, Satan's side always attacks first. And God's side is kind of responding to that, this kind of aggression in defending this kind of freedom and humanity and so on and so forth. So this is a really turning, this is a turning point in human history. Depending on the outcome of this conflict, this may actually expedite the coming of a God-centered world. So that's exactly what the principle is stating. And it's amazing that this principle, which was published, in the 50s or 60s, it's relevant today, and it's happening right now. Okay, so let's go to the signs of the third blessing. Sorry, the time is short, so I'm gonna try to wrap this one up. So remember that God's third blessing to Adam and Eve was to gain dominion over the natural world. This means having this heart towards creation of love, and also having the external capability to care for it. Both of these were lost at the time of the fall, but we can see a restoration of that dominion over creation in the present era. Let's read. Internal dominion denotes dominion of the heart. A person who reaches perfection will be able to love the creation with the same love as that which emanates from God's heart, and appreciates its beauty with the same delight as God. Let me ask you a question. How many of you love animals? I think people are growing in their appreciation and love for animals and for the natural environment. I can testify that I've learned to love animals through Torah. I really didn't like pets, but he won my heart. But I think there is an increasing interest and care for animals. Before, it's always been a battle, man versus beast. But these days, it's more like the Discovery Channel. And look at all this beautiful nature and animals. And I remember I saw a show recently hosted by Paws, the Progressive Animal Welfare Society. I don't think that existed 200 years ago. Who cared about taking care of, foster animals? But I think humanity's heart or elevation of love towards animals has increased over time. Also, there's definitely an increased interest in the care for our environment. There's many shows like Our Planet, really showing how important it is that we take responsibility to preserve the natural environment. So another sign of the development of the third blessing is also not just our heart towards interest and care for nature, but our external ability to kind of manage and develop our natural environment. Let's read. External dominion denotes proper mastery of the creation through science and technology. People's spirituality is being elevated and their internal dominion over the creation is being restored. As a result, their external dominion is also being renewed, leading to today's highly advanced science. Modern people have built an extremely comfortable and pleasant living environment through the economic progress that has accompanied scientific development. Fallen people have thus been restoring their dominion over the universe, advancing toward the reestablishment of God's third blessing. Observing this, we are assured that the present era is the last days. So I mentioned this last week, but I want to reiterate, there's been so much development of science and technology in the past 200 years, and even more so in the last 40 years. One example of a more comfortable living environment, 200 years ago, kings and emperors, they didn't have flushing toilets. But that's available for everybody these days. Well, not everybody, but at least in certain countries, it's available. But again, even the highest or the most powerful people in the past didn't have that basic comfort. Also, there's been a highly developed transportation and communication technology, which totally eliminates any barriers of time and space. Being able to fly halfway across the world in 14 hours. Cell phones didn't exist 30 years ago. The internet didn't exist 40 years ago. Imagine that. But one problem is there's too much tech and it's been invading my private space. People can call me at any time these days, so that's a problem. But anyway, this development is not just for our convenience. This development in science and technology is so that we can better take care of our natural environment. And on that note, I wanted to just share a couple quotes from Mother Moon about her concern over the environment. This is from a couple speeches that were very recent, the past year. Over time, humankind has devastated this beautiful earth. Step by step, this is becoming more serious. Climate change, rising sea levels, and especially natural disasters. All of this has resulted from humankind having no faith in God. I feel deeply concerned about whether our beloved children will be able to live healthy lives in the future. It is now time to put aside all greed and, as original sons and daughters, restore this beautiful earth before it is too late. So this is a very beautiful message of concern from Mother Moon. I want to really take heed of this and encourage all of us to make sure we do our part in fulfilling the restoration of the third blessing and take good care of our earth. Finally, one point I'd like to conclude with is this passage from the Divine Principle. A family can be formed only when there is a father and a mother. Only then can true brotherly love arise. Only when Christ comes again as the parent of humanity will all people join together in one great family and live harmoniously in the global village. So I think this is a really powerful point. It's like, we can all be friends, we can all be brothers and sisters, we can all be part of the same, United Nations team from different nations. But the problem is, if there isn't a sense of connection with a parental figure, we'll always be kind of fighting each other or just kind of looking at our own interest. So Father and Mother Moon, they really came to stand in this role as true parents to really help bring everyone together as one family and to really provide an example of this unconditional and universal love to everyone equally. We need this kind of model in order to bring humanity together as one family. It can't just be sibling nations trying to vie for our own interests. There needs to be a parental figure to bring about peace. And that's exactly what, Father and Mother Moon were called to do, is to substantially stand in that role as a parental figure. And I think this is another major sign that really the world is moving towards that inevitable, or hopefully inevitable. Actually, maybe I'll end with this. God's been wanting to create this peaceful world forever, right? But the reason why it's been taking so long is because he can't just snap his fingers and make it happen. He needs to cooperate with our own portion of responsibility as human beings. So the more we're able to respond and live according to principle and towards that ideal, the faster we can bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. So, so these are really the signs that the principle outlines, that the three great blessings have been developed over time. Let's go to the summary. Okay, so signs that the first blessing has been developed is elevated spirituality, elevated sense of freedom, and higher sense of human value. Examples of the second blessing developing is this sense of a growing global community, American Christian values having global influence, and the blessing movement itself. And finally, examples of the third blessing that it's been developing is there's an increased care for animals and the environment, and the development of science and technology has created a comfortable living environment, also bringing the world closer together. So, brothers and sisters, Father and Mother Moon, they responded to Jesus' request to carry out this blessing movement to finalize God's original plan of bringing about the kingdom of heaven on earth, one family under God. We are living in the last days where this dream will soon become a reality. We have the culture, we have the truth, we have the technology, but we need everyone's help to make this dream come true. Despite all the challenges we see in the world today, let's maintain a hopeful attitude by reminding ourselves how far we've come as a human race. And let's do our part in contributing towards this peaceful world. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you and your family this week.